wrong?
You just got fired. But maybe Cole just picked the wrong person to mess with.
Then let him learn to repent. And now, this day is ours.
I was still adjusting the cuffs of my suit, trying to look like a man fully prepared for marriage, when my phone vibrated hard enough to rattle the boutonniere pinned to my lapel. I shouldn't have checked it, not during my own wedding, not while the guests were still turning in their seats, not with Marla's hand tucked so gently into mine, but curiosity nudged me like a rude waiter, and I glanced down. A single text blinked up at me. "You're fired. Happy wedding." Cole. For a second, I honestly thought it was a prank, a drunk groomsman, a cousin with a bad sense of humor, but no only one person in my life weaponized punctuation that aggressively. The hall blurred around me white orchids, polished marble floors, the hum of a string quartet drifting through the air, yet all I saw was that message. I'm 45 years old. I've spent 23 of those years in construction management, and somehow I'd managed to get fired at the precise moment the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride." Perfect timing. Really? A crooked smile tugged at my mouth. "Well," I muttered, "who doesn't dream of unemployment during their vows truly magical?" Marla leaned closer, expecting something sweet or sentimental. Instead, she read the text, stared at it for a solid 2 seconds, then lifted her eyes with that steady, unnerving calm she's known for. "Grant," she said softly. "I knew this was coming, and as ridiculous as it looks, it might actually work in your favor." Her confidence shook me more than Cole's message. I slipped the phone away, trying to reconcile two realities: the fact that I'd just married the woman I love, and the fact that Cole Ramsey, my boss of 3 whole months and the 33-year-old son of our CEO, had chosen this of all moments to prove he had authority. But as the grand doors opened and applause rolled toward us, Marla squeezed my hand with quiet certainty. "Let it go today," she whispered. "Sometimes something has to break before everything else finally lines up." I didn't know it then. But my firing wasn't a collapse. It was the first tremor of a foundation long overdue to crack. And if you've ever had a moment in life shake you awake the way that text message shook me, I'd love to know, where are you watching from right now? Your comments and support truly help us keep bringing these stories to life. So don't forget to subscribe. It means more to our team than you know. By the time the reception music shifted from classical to something vaguely celebratory, I'd convinced myself that I could forget about Cole's wedding day stunt for a few hours. I tried to breathe, tried to focus on Marla's hand in mine, tried to let the warmth of the room pull me back into the moment. But the universe, apparently, wasn't finished with me yet. My phone started buzzing again once, then twice, then in a relentless rhythm that didn't match any ringtone I owned. I ignored it at first. After all, I was still in my wedding suit, still surrounded by friends, still pretending my life hadn't tilted sideways. But the vibrations kept coming, building like a storm under the surface, until I finally slipped the phone from my pocket. 108 missed calls. The number glared back at me like a joke someone forgot to finish. For a moment, I genuinely thought my phone had malfunctioned, maybe a software glitch, maybe a pocket dial apocalypse. But then I saw the call log: crew supervisors, site foremen, city inspectors, and at the top, 14 missed calls from CEO Douglas Ramsey. My stomach tightened, not from fear exactly, but from the kind of pressure that comes when you know a disaster is unfolding and you're somehow at the center of it. I stepped away from the dance floor, ducking behind a column draped in white roses, and tapped the voicemail icon with a thumb that felt suddenly heavier than it should have. Most messages were frantic fragments, half sentences about locked gates, stalled deliveries, confused subcontractors. But the last voicemail was different. Douglas's voice, normally steady and polished, carried an edge I'd never heard before. He spoke quickly, breathlessly, as if he were trying to outrun a catastrophe already in motion. "Grant," he said, "the system you built has locked the entire construction site. Materials can't be checked in. Supervisors can't log inspections. The city wants answers. Everyone wants answers, and they all want them from you." The message ended there, but the weight of it hung over me like wet concrete. I felt my pulse spike, anger pushing against panic, each one trying to claw its way to the surface. 20 years in construction management had taught me how to stay calm when everything around me shook. But this was different. This was personal. As the music swelled behind me, I forced myself to breathe, though something inside felt close to snapping. I should have been celebrating, laughing, taking in the moment I had waited years for. Instead, I was hiding behind floral decor, listening to my career crumble in real time. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the hall. Another part wanted to march into Heritage Builders and demand answers. But all I could do was stand suspended between rage and disbelief, unsure which feeling would break loose first. I should have expected it: the avalanche of calls, the panicked messages, the sudden worship from people who barely acknowledged me last week. And yet, as I stepped out of the reception hall and into the cool evening air, I felt a strange clarity forming, the kind that only arrives when your world tilts just far enough to reveal what was always there. Cole Ramsey had a title handed to him like a party favor. I, on the other hand, had something far less glamorous but infinitely more useful: a functioning brain. It was almost funny in a bleak, dark comedy sort of way. For 2 years, I'd watched Cole stomp through Heritage Builders like a kid wearing his father's oversized boots, tripping over protocols, ignoring safety standards, and assuming the universe would rearrange itself to fit his ego. Meanwhile, I'd been the one drafting the logistics, smoothing the chaos, and keeping the company's reputation from falling into an open trench. But the moment he became my supervisor, he treated every system I built as optional, every warning I gave as overreaction, every hour I worked as proof I was old school. I held my phone tighter as I walked farther from the noise of the reception. Cole had always believed power lived in his last name, but power, real power, lived in the infrastructure I designed: quiet, precise, and absolutely unforgiving when mishandled. He never understood that. Probably never tried. The truth cut deeper than I expected. I had spent months swallowing irritation, flattening my reactions, and pretending his arrogance didn't grate against every bit of professionalism I had left. Now, standing under the glow of the streetlights outside my own wedding reception, that bitterness finally surfaced. It wasn't a fiery rage. It was something colder and more honest: awareness. I opened the admin logs on my phone, half curious, half afraid of what I'd find. And there it was, shining like a neon sign of incompetence. Cole had tried to log into my project management system using his newly granted director credentials. Not once, not twice, 6 times. Each attempt got bolder, more careless, and on the 7th try, the system did exactly what I built it to do. It locked down, fully, irreversibly. The entire $60 million project froze like a glacier. A slow, humorless laugh escaped me. "Congratulations, Cole," I murmured to myself. "You finally pushed the right button, just not the one you meant to." The irony was almost poetic. The man who believed titles made him untouchable had unlocked a catastrophe with his own impatience, and I, the one he tried to belittle, had become the only person capable of thawing the freeze he triggered for the first time that night. I didn't feel powerless. I felt necessary. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of everything changing. By the time our plane touched down on the island, I'd promised myself I wouldn't let Heritage Builders ruin my honeymoon. I would relax, I would breathe, I would enjoy the miracle of having married a brilliant woman like Marla, someone who somehow loved a man who carried more stress than luggage. But the moment we reached the beach resort, and I took my first glorious sip of coconut water, my phone began vibrating across the table like it was trying to escape. I should have turned it off. Truly, instead, with the same calm curiosity a man shows while watching a slow-motion train wreck, I hit speaker. "Grant," CEO Douglas Ramsey rasped, "I know it's your honeymoon, but we need to discuss incentives." I leaned back and let the sun warm my face. "Incentives," I echoed, swirling my coconut water like a fine scotch. "Yes, yes," he rushed. "A salary raise, a substantial one, and a new title, Director of Operations. No senior director. Actually, choose your own title. We just need you to fix what Cole broke." I offered. Silence long enough for a seagull to scream overhead. Then, stiffly, "We prefer the term assist with an urgent systems matter." I glanced at Marla beside me. She lounged in her chair, sunglasses on, radiating the serene confidence of someone who had absolutely predicted this disaster. I muted the call. "Should I feel bad?" I asked. "No," she said without turning her head. "If anything, ask for a fruit platter too." I unmuted. "Douglas, I appreciate the offer, but I'm on a beach watching my wife enjoy her drink. I'll have to get back to you. Grant. Please, he whispered. The city is breathing down our necks. Inspectors want answers. Materials are piling at the gates. Cole insists he can fix it, but he can't. I said, another silence, then a defeated, no, he absolutely cannot. By the seventh voicemail, each more desperate than the last, I finally put the phone face down and turned to the waves. That was when Marla lifted her sunglasses and said, almost bored. This isn't even the real problem. I raised an eyebrow. No. Then what is, she took a slow sip. Grant, I'm the one who reviews commercial submissions for the city. In the past few months, Cole's submissions have been sloppy. I blinked. Define sloppy. Removing safety notes, altering reinforcement requirements, substituting cheaper materials. Honestly, amateur hour. A low whistle escaped me. And you didn't mention this sooner. I thought you already knew, she said with a shrug. Besides, I figured the system you built would catch him eventually. I leaned back, letting the realization settle. Heritage Builders wasn't just struggling, it was a bonfire. One Cole had proudly ignited with both hands, and for the first time in years, I felt absolutely no urgency to put it out. When we finally returned from the honeymoon, I walked into our apartment with a strange mix of calm and resolve, the kind of calm that comes after you've watched your old life crumble from a beach chair, and the kind of resolve that grows when you realize you don't owe anyone an apology for their own mistakes. Cole had set the fire, Douglas had panicked, Heritage Builders had collapsed under its own negligence, and me, I was done letting other people decide the value of my work. The morning after we unpacked, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and opened my laptop. No more patching their problems, no more carrying a failing department on my back. I wanted to build something that reflected what I'd spent 20 years fighting for: safety, ethics, accountability. I typed the name before I even fully understood why it felt right. Benchmark Integrity Solutions. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't dramatic, but it was honest. And it was mine. Marla walked in, wrapped in a robe, hair still damp from the shower. You look serious, she said, grabbing her own coffee. I am, I replied. I'm starting my own company. Independent inspections, compliance verification, full oversight for structural safety. She didn't even blink. Good. You should have done that years ago. Her certainty poured fuel on my determination. For the first time in months, I felt the ground steady beneath my feet. No corporate politics. No incompetent supervisors. No scrambling to compensate for someone else's shortcuts. Just me, my standards, and a blank slate. By noon, I had registered the business, drafted a basic website, and outlined service packages. It felt surreal, as if I'd stepped out of someone else's story and finally into my own. My phone buzzed with emails, mostly automated confirmations, until one message caught my attention. Subject line, request for proposal. Sender, Halcyon Development Group. I frowned. Halcyon was one of the biggest commercial real estate developers in the region, far above the league Heritage Builders had ever played in. I opened the email and read, "We are seeking an independent third-party inspection firm for an urgent compliance audit on a major contractor. We have reason to suspect procedural irregularities and potential misrepresentation in past submissions." At first, I assumed they'd sent it by mistake, but then the next line hit me like a steel beam dropping from a crane. The contractor in question is Heritage Builders. I leaned back, letting the irony settle. My first potential client wasn't the city. It wasn't a small business. It wasn't even a neutral party. It was a corporation that wanted to investigate the very company that had fired me at the altar of my own wedding day. Marla read the email over my shoulder and whistled softly. "Well," she said, "nothing says poetic justice like your former employer being audited by your new one." And just like that, any doubt I had evaporated. Benchmark Integrity Solutions wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a statement, a line drawn in concrete, and I was ready to carve my name into it. I didn't expect Halcyon Development Group to move quickly, but apparently when millions of dollars are on the line, corporations find new and exciting speeds. Within 48 hours. I was sitting in a conference room reviewing documents they had already collected: purchase orders, drawing revisions, inspection reports, and a thick stack of Cole's digital submissions. The moment I opened the first file, a familiar ache tightened in my chest. It was the same combination of anger and resignation I'd swallowed for 2 years while watching Cole butcher my protocols. But now, I wasn't his employee. I wasn't anyone's buffer or cleanup crew. I was an auditor. My job was simple: tell the truth. And the truth was uglier than even I anticipated. Column specifications that were supposed to be 18 inches thick had been mysteriously reduced to 14. Steel reinforcement schedules showed a 40% reduction, as if someone had decided gravity would kindly cooperate. Foundation notes included substitutions of cheaper materials, the kind that cracked if you looked at them too hard. Every corner Cole had cut was preserved in pixels: his signature, his timestamps, his sloppy edits. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the margins of a PDF. I compiled the findings into a report, line by excruciating line, and submitted it to Halcyon. The executives read in silence, their faces stiffening with every page. When they finished, one of them finally exhaled. "We'll be forwarding this to the city," she said, "effective immediately." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral even though a quiet satisfaction warmed somewhere deep in my chest. I didn't celebrate, I didn't smirk, I didn't gloat, but for the first time in months, I felt aligned with myself, like the universe had finally decided to reroute things the way they should have been all along. The fallout came swiftly. The city froze every active Heritage Builders project. Inspectors descended on job sites like a swarm. Deliveries halted. Workers were sent home. Concrete trucks were turned away at the gates. Structural engineers were brought in to review every compromise drawing Cole had approved. I watched it unfold from a distance, as an observer, not a participant, and it was surreal seeing the machine I had once held together finally groan under its own weight. Then the headlines hit. The Ramsey Collapse, major contractor under investigation for structural fraud. It spread fast: business journals, local news, construction watchdog groups. Cole's name was everywhere, and not in the flattering way he always imagined it would be. His license was suspended pending review. Heritage Builders lost millions in a single week. And Douglas Ramsey, the man who once assured me his son was finding his leadership style, suddenly had nothing to say. I didn't dance around my living room in victory. I didn't toast with champagne. Instead, I sat quietly at my desk, rereading the final audit note I'd written. Integrity is not optional. Simple, direct, and for the first time in a long time, undeniably true. Justice had arrived steady, impartial, and exactly on time. The first sign that something had shifted came 3 days after the headlines about Heritage Builders exploded across the industry. I was sorting paperwork in my home office when Marla stepped inside holding a thick cream envelope. "This was hand-delivered," she said, placing it on my desk with a small, knowing look. "From Douglas." I opened it slowly, half expecting a legal threat or a desperate plea disguised as corporate formality. Instead, a handwritten letter slid out, neat cursive on heavy paper, the kind executives use when they need humility to look expensive. Grant. Some failures make noise, others leave silence in their wake. Ours has managed to do both. I owe you an apology, one I should have given long before things collapsed. We need your help. The words continued, but I found myself rereading the first lines, not because I was moved, but because I was measuring the weight of his regret. Douglas Ramsey had always been polished, controlled, and borderline theatrical. Yet the letter sounded like a man who had aged a decade in a week. When I arrived at the small rented office he'd requested for a private meeting, the contrast was startling. Douglas sat at the conference table, shoulders slumped, the confident CEO replaced by someone smaller, quieter, beside him. Cole hovered near the wall, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the floor like a schoolboy awaiting punishment. "Grant," Douglas said, standing slowly. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, taking the seat across from them. "I'm here to listen. Nothing more." He exhaled with relief. "Fair enough." Cole swallowed hard before speaking. "I owe you an apology, too." His voice wavered. And for the first time, I saw genuine discomfort rather than arrogance. What I did was reckless. I thought I could handle things. I couldn't. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't rush to fill the silence. Some truths needed space to breathe. Douglas slid a small silver USB across the table. "This is a full copy of the system you built," he said quietly. "We tried to understand it. We tried to operate it." His voice dropped to a whisper, one edged with something between admiration and defeat. "But the truth is, we never fully understood how any of it works. Only you do." I studied the drive, noting the tremor in his hand. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was recognition the moment a leader finally sees the cost of ignoring the person who held the entire operation together. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply folded the letter back into its envelope and placed my hand over the USB. "Douglas," I said calmly. "What happens next depends on whether you want a rescue or a rebuilding." For the first time since I'd walked in. He lifted his eyes. "I think," he said softly. "We need both." When Douglas finished explaining the mess Heritage Builders had fallen into, he leaned back as if the chair itself might offer salvation. Cole sat rigidly beside him, hands locked, jaw tight, trying to look professional, but failing miserably. They were both waiting for the moment I would say the words they needed. "I'll come back." But that moment wasn't coming. For the first time in a long while, I felt no fear of disappointing anyone, no anxiety, no obligation, just clarity, clean, sharp, and long overdue. I folded my hands on the table and let a slow breath out. "Let me save you the suspense," I said. "I'm not returning to Heritage Builders." Douglas blinked, and Cole shifted like he'd been slapped without warning. I kept my voice steady, almost gentle, the way a surgeon might explain an unavoidable cut. "But," I continued, "I am willing to discuss something else, something that actually makes sense." Douglas straightened, hope flickering in his tired eyes. "Anything. Tell us. I want a partnership." I said, "Heritage handles design and construction. Benchmark Integrity Solutions handles compliance, inspections, and full oversight." I paused, letting the structure of it settle between us. Two separate entities, equal footing, shared responsibility. Cole frowned. "So, you'd be supervising our work, no?" I said, meeting his eyes. "I'd be ensuring it's safe." The silence that followed was thick and meaningful. It wasn't antagonistic, it was realization. For years, they had treated oversight as an afterthought. Now, oversight was the only thing that could save them. Douglas cleared his throat. "And your conditions?" I allowed myself a small, measured smile. "Simple. If my team finds a violation, any violation, we have full authority to halt construction immediately. No debate, no appeal, no political maneuvering. When I raise a red flag, everything stops." Cole's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked to his father for backup, but Douglas didn't move. He understood, maybe for the first time. "And if we disagree," Douglas finally asked, though the defeat in his tone already held the answer, "then the city will disagree with you too." I replied, "My reports go to them as well. I'm not playing buffer ever again." Douglas slowly nodded, the weight of the arrangement settling across his shoulders like a stone mantle. "And compensation up front," I said. "Full contract value, non-negotiable." Another pause, then agreed. I leaned back, the quiet power of the moment washing over me, not loud, not triumphant, just solid, controlled, earned, for years. I'd worked inside Heritage's walls, plugging leaks they refused to acknowledge. Now I would stand beside them, not beneath them, and decide whether those walls were worth keeping upright. "I'll draft the contract," I said. "But understand this clearly." "Douglas." They both looked up. "In this partnership, safety isn't a department anymore. It's the one thing I own completely. And for the first time." Neither of them argued. If someone had told me a year earlier that I'd be watching Cole Ramsey stumble through rebar inspections at 6 a.m, I would have laughed until my ribs hurt, yet there he was, boots muddy, clipboard in hand, trying his best not to look overwhelmed as the crew unloaded steel beams behind him. The son of a CEO, once allergic to actual labor, was now the first person on the job site. I kept my distance at first, not because I wanted him to fail, but because I didn't trust sudden transformations. People don't change overnight. They change under pressure, and they change slowly, one uncomfortable choice at a time. So every morning. I arrived 10 minutes after him and pretended not to notice him glancing my way, checking to see whether I'd acknowledge his new routine. I didn't. Not yet. Hope, in my experience, needed a leash. Cole worked through rain, wind, dust storms, the kind of conditions that tested veterans, let alone someone who once complained about the air conditioning being too industrial. He shadowed every crew member, asked questions, real ones, not the performative kind, and he repeated tasks until they were done correctly. He didn't talk back, he didn't cut corners, and most startling of all, he listened, even so. I kept my guard up. I reviewed his site reports with microscopic scrutiny. I double-checked every measurement he submitted. I verified his logs against supervisor records. I wanted proof, not promises. And for weeks, the proof held steady. Still, there was a difference between working hard and being accountable. The latter usually revealed itself in moments when an audience wasn't expected. Ironically, that moment came during a community meeting, one of those tense gatherings where residents questioned everything from noise levels to parking disruptions. Cole was assigned to present the structural updates. I sat in the back, unannounced, arms crossed, ready to intervene if he decided to charm or sidestep his way through the meeting. But what happened instead caught me so off guard I actually straightened in my seat. Midway through the presentation, an older resident raised her hand and asked, "Why did this project stall last year? Who was responsible?" A perfect opportunity for evasion. A perfect chance to blame the system. A perfect moment to lie by omission. But Cole didn't. He gripped the podium, inhaled, and said clearly, "The fault was mine. I ignored protocols. I made changes I shouldn't have. My actions endangered the project, and I'm rebuilding trust from the ground up." The room went silent, not hostile, just stunned. Even the residents who had arrived ready for a fight seemed unsure how to react. For the first time since all this began, I felt something shift inside me, small, cautious, but unmistakably real. Maybe the kid truly wanted to change. And maybe, just maybe, he finally understood the weight of what a building and a life was supposed to stand on by the time the final beam was set in place. I found myself standing at the edge of the completed site, watching sunlight break across steel and concrete that finally lived up to its blueprints. 1 year earlier, this project had been a battlefield frozen, chaotic, and poisoned by decisions that nearly ruined everything. Now it stood finished on schedule, under budget, and safer than any development Heritage Builders had ever delivered. And for the first time in my 45 years, I felt something close to uncomplicated relief. Heritage didn't just survive, it evolved. The new partnership model forced everyone to respect boundaries that should have existed from the beginning. Crews followed protocols without complaint, managers reviewed plans with actual curiosity, and the city sent fewer inspectors because, for once, they trusted the process, and through it all, I stayed where I belonged, independent, objective, and impossible to pressure. It was strange watching a company that once ignored every warning now treat safety like a religion. But growth rarely arrives dressed in comfort. Cole's transformation was harder to categorize. He wasn't perfect. Nobody rewrites their instincts overnight, but he worked with a steadiness I hadn't seen before. He showed up early, stayed late, and asked questions he once would have mocked. Some days I still watched him with suspicion, waiting for the old arrogance to slip out. But most days, I found myself acknowledging the quiet truth the kid was trying. And trying, in this industry, means more than pretending. It means choosing integrity even when no one is watching. The project's completion brought recognition I never expected. Benchmark Integrity Solutions became a name people requested, not discovered by accident. And within months I was reviewing projects across the state. Journalists wrote pieces about the man who rebuilt accountability, though I always felt the credit belonged more to the lesson than the teacher. On the anniversary of my wedding day firing, my phone buzzed with a message from Cole. "Thank you for giving me a chance I didn't deserve." I stared at the screen before replying. "Just don't make me teach you twice," looking back. I realized the victory wasn't in outsmarting anyone or watching a company stumble. It was in choosing to rebuild what mattered instead of burning everything to the ground. Revenge can be loud, but real power is quiet, steady, patient, and measured. And when we choose to rise instead of strike, we change more than outcomes. We change ourselves. If this chapter of my life speaks to something in you, let me know where you're watching from. Your comments, likes, shares, and subscriptions truly help us keep these stories alive. Thank you for being part of this journey with me today.